Picture this. The summer air over Godric's Hollow hums with that heavy stillness that always comes after a war hasn't yet begun, but everyone knows it's coming. The grass is high, the air smells faintly of burnt parchment from someone's backyard, spell gone wrong, and you're sitting with James Potter on the roof of his father's shed, watching the last fireworks of youth sputter across the night. What did wizards do after Hogwarts anyway, when there was no Quidditch Cup to win, no detentions to earn, no forbidden forest left to sneak into? You can almost taste the restlessness, the feeling that the Marauders' golden years have quietly slipped through your fingers while you were busy laughing too loud. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through those long post-graduation days with that odd mix of triumph and hollowness, the kind that only follows people who think they've just finished the most exciting chapter of their lives, only to find the next page blank. Sirius Black, hair longer, eyes sharper, pretends he's not lost, but you can see it in the way he lingers a little too long at every joke, as if trying to remember how laughter's supposed to feel. James, of course, acts like everything's fine. He's got Lily now, and a small cottage already half cluttered with Quidditch gear and enchanted teacups that never quite stop pouring. Peter tags along, loyal as ever, though you sense the tremor in his wand hand when thunder rolls in. And Remus, poor Remus, spends more time staring at the horizon than the people beside him, as if he can already see the storm crawling closer. You walk through Diagon Alley one last time before it changes forever. The owl shop smells of feathers and fear. Madame Malkin's has stopped stocking fancy dress robes and now quietly hems battle cloaks instead. Even Zonko's is subdued, its fireworks gathering dust in the back room, as if the joke's finally gone too far. A headline flutters past, dark mark over Birmingham suburb, and you wonder when the papers became this casual about terror. One mainstream historical fact buried beneath all the wizarding gossip. The real First Wizarding War didn't start with a bang, but with a slow tightening of curfews, quiet disappearances, and neighbors pretending they didn't notice. Scholars still debate whether Dumbledore formed the Order as a reaction to the Ministry's fear or to its indifference, and you imagine him somewhere in his tower, eyes twinkling less than before, knowing full well both theories are true. At night, you join the old crew at the Leaky Cauldron for what everyone swears will be the last time before real life begins. There's butterbeer, loud toasts, and an enchanted jukebox stuck on Celestina Warbeck's mournful hits. James leans across the table and asks, "Do you ever think we peaked too early?" You laugh, though it's not really funny, because the answer is obvious. You peaked the moment the castle gates closed behind you. The Marauders map, now folded and gathering dust in Sirius's coat pocket, feels more like a relic than a prank. Somewhere between the laughter and the ale, a thought slips in, uninvited. What if magic isn't enough this time? The night spills into dawn, as all good nights should, and you end up wandering down a London street where muggles are just starting their morning routines. They don't see the faint green shimmer in the alleyway, the trace of a spell gone wrong. They don't see the young wizard in a worn leather jacket looking up at the sky like he's daring fate to come find him. You do. And for a fleeting second, you understand the strange, tragic poetry of this moment. These boys standing at the crossroads between legend and obituary, still pretending they have time. One quirky tidbit historians love to argue over is the rumor that Sirius briefly tried living as a muggle during this period, sleeping in a stolen motorbike garage and feeding stray cats under bridges. The stories say he lasted 3 nights before apparating back to London, muttering something about the noise of electricity making it impossible to think. Whether true or not, it feels like something he would do. Reckless, curious, half-hearted rebellion against a world he still believed he could outrun. And then, the letter comes. Not to you directly, but through James, who reads it aloud under the morning sun with the sort of grin that's trying too hard. Dumbledore's neat handwriting, all blue ink and calm authority. There's a meeting tonight. Confidential. Bring only those you trust completely. You can almost hear the hinge creak as the world shifts on its axis. You'd laugh if it weren't so terrifying. After all, who better than the Marauders to take on a war? The summer that began with laziness and jokes now ends with marching orders. You fold the letter, pocket it, and take one last look at the sleepy world around you. The cracked pavement, the clinking teacups, the first rays of light spilling through the blinds. Peace is still technically here, but you can already feel it dying in your hands. You arrive at number 12, Grimmauld Place, and the air itself seems to recoil. The old townhouse hides between others like a secret embarrassed to exist, its dark brick facade flickering into visibility only when Sirius touches the door. The moment it opens, you're struck by that unmistakable black family perfume, dust, decay, and the faint metallic tang of old curses. It's strange, isn't it, how a house can feel like a person? This one scowls at you. The portraits sneer, the curtains wheeze, and even the chandelier seems to judge your muddy boots. Sirius steps in with mock grandeur, sweeping his arm like an actor entering a doomed stage play. "Home," he says, the word drenched in irony. You follow, feeling like you're walking into history's lungs, breathing in every ugly secret the Blacks ever tried to hide. In another age, pure-blood families like this ran the wizarding world. Patriarchs in velvet robes, bloodlines cataloged like museum collections. The historical fact buried in this gloom is that these families once sat on the Wizengamot, shaping laws that favored their kind, ensuring purity remained policy. Centuries later, those echoes still crawl in the wallpaper, disguised as family pride. You wander through rooms that haven't seen daylight since before Grindelwald's fall. Tapestries of dead ancestors hang like judges in a courtroom. The family crest, a proud silver serpent coiled around the letter B, seems to glare whenever Sirius laughs too loud. You can almost hear his mother's voice, a shriek preserved in memory. "Blood, traitor!" He chuckles at it now, but his laughter lands brittle like glass on stone. You spot the faint burn mark where her portrait once hung, the wall still scarred from when Sirius tried to blast her away after running from home. He tells the story with flair, yet there's a flicker of guilt beneath his grin, an acknowledgement that hatred runs both ways. Somewhere in these halls, a house elf mutters curses under its breath, loyal to ghosts that no longer pay it any mind. The kitchen downstairs feels less like a place to eat and more like a bunker. Sirius lights a cigarette with a flick of his wand, the flame briefly illuminating the crooked table where generations once dined in silence. You sit, listening to the creak of pipes, the faint ticking of a magical clock that hasn't moved in years. There's something haunted in this stillness, a weight that presses down until even breathing feels disloyal. You imagine the young Sirius, 16 and furious, standing here in defiance while his parents listed every cousin who'd made the family proud. One of them, Bellatrix, her name spoken like prophecy. You can't help thinking that rebellion runs thin in bloodlines like these. It's not courage that keeps Sirius standing here now, but spite. A curious tidbit whispered among wizarding historians claims that some of the Black family's portraits were bewitched to eavesdrop on their descendants, relaying gossip through enchanted mirrors to other pure-blood houses. Scholars still debate whether this was clever networking or pure paranoia. Either way, you can't shake the feeling that the walls are still listening. Later that evening, Dumbledore's letter leads you and Sirius to a dimly lit tavern somewhere off Nocturne Alley. The bartender doesn't speak, just slides 2 glasses your way, eyes darting toward the door. You wait for the others, James, Remus, a few faces you don't yet know, but for now it's just the 2 of you, cloaked in tension. Sirius leans back, smoke curling from his wand tip. "Funny, isn't it?" he says. "Spent years mocking my family for worshipping bloodlines, and now we're about to risk ours for everyone else's." You raise your glass, not sure whether to toast or tremble. The world outside hums with unrest, spells crackling faintly in the distance like summer thunder. Somewhere, a child cries. Somewhere else, someone vanishes. The war isn't official yet, but you can already smell it, fear and ambition brewing in equal measure. When you leave Grimald Place again, the night feels colder, narrower. You glance back and see the curtains twitch, as if the house itself were sighing with relief at your departure. You wonder what will become of it when Sirius is gone, when all these ghosts finally get what they've been waiting for. You imagine the place swallowed by dust and darkness until one day, years later, a secret order will reclaim it, turning its malice into headquarters. But that's another story, one you'll get to much later when hope is a smaller word. For now, you follow Sirius down a narrow street where lamplight bleeds like honey onto the cobblestones, his boots echoing with the rhythm of someone walking away from everything that made him. He doesn't look back once. You do, though, because someone has to remember how the shadows first took root. Whether true or not, it feels like something he would do. Reckless, curious, half-hearted rebellion against a world he still believed he could outrun. And then the letter comes, not to you directly, but through James, who reads it aloud under the morning sun with the sort of grin that's trying too hard. Dumbledore's neat handwriting, all blue ink and calm authority. There's a meeting tonight, confidential. Bring only those you trust completely. You can almost hear the hinge creak as the world shifts on its axis. You'd laugh if it weren't so terrifying. After all, who better than the Marauders to take on a war? The summer that began with laziness and jokes now ends with marching orders. You fold the letter, pocket it, and take one last look at the sleepy world around you. The cracked pavement, the clinking teacups, the first rays of light spilling through the blinds. Peace is still technically here, but you can already feel it dying in your hands. The first meeting of the Order of the Phoenix feels less like a council of heroes and more like a fever dream held together by candlelight and nerves. You stand in a cramped attic above a Muggle bookshop in Soho, the walls lined with forgotten biographies of people who never believed in magic and now would never know that a war was about to be fought over it. The flicker of enchanted lanterns casts long, nervous shadows across faces young and old. Dumbledore sits at the center, calm but not serene. Even he looks tired, as though the weight of too many prophecies has started to settle into his bones. You can smell parchment, pipe smoke, and something sharper, the metallic tang of apprehension. "We are not soldiers," Dumbledore begins, "but we will be forced to act like them." You glance at Sirius, whose eyes gleam in that reckless way that always makes you fear and admire him at once. James, of course, grins. To him, everything dangerous still feels like a game that he can win if he just moves fast enough. You realize somewhere between the introductions and the quiet oaths that this is how legends begin, not with trumpets, but with scared people pretending they're brave enough to stay. You jot notes in your head, though you know memory will serve better than ink. The roster is eclectic. Healers, aurors, idealists, and a few eccentrics who've clearly wandered in because someone said Dumbledore and resistance in the same sentence. There's a witch named Marlene who swears she can hear spells before they're cast, a linguist from Durmstrang translating Death Eater codes, and Emmeline Vance, who looks like she hasn't smiled since her brother disappeared. The mix of accents and ideologies would make a historian giddy. One mainstream fact that later scholars love to cite is that the Order's earliest meetings included more cultural diversity than the Ministry of Magic managed in an entire decade. Still, ideals mean little when you're one whispered betrayal away from ruin. You watch as Dumbledore hands out charmed medallions, phoenix-shaped tokens that pulse faintly when a member is nearby. They're beautiful, but you can't help thinking they'd make fine targets. After the meeting, the group disperses in pairs, fading into the rain-slicked London night like phantoms. You stay behind with Sirius, James, and Remus, the four of you huddled over a map of Britain enchanted to show bursts of dark activity. Tiny red sparks bloom near Bristol, and Sirius taps the parchment thoughtfully. "Death Eater recruitment," he mutters. James looks at him sideways. You sound like you've done this before. Sirius smirks, but his voice lowers. Let's just say the family business kept me informed. For a moment, none of you speak, and the silence grows thick with unspoken fears. You break it with a joke about how you'll probably end up guarding cauldrons instead of saving lives, and everyone laughs just enough to make it believable. It's the kind of laughter people use to keep their hands from shaking. The days that follow blend into a strange rhythm of half-lived normalcy. You meet in pubs, post offices, and abandoned train stations, the sort of places muggles rush through without ever noticing the flicker of magic in the air. Messages arrive through mundane means: a torn playing card, a burnt corner of newspaper, sometimes an owl feather tucked into your coat when you're not looking. You grow used to the feeling of being watched, though whether by friend or foe you can't tell anymore. A quirky tidbit buried in a forgotten memoir later reveals that Order members sometimes used enchanted paper cranes as decoys, letting them drift along riverbanks with false plans, hoping Death Eaters would waste time chasing origami ghosts. Dumbledore never confirmed it, of course, but the image sticks. Dozens of glowing birds floating through London's mist, carrying nonsense in their wings. One night, Sirius takes you flying above the city, his motorbike roaring like a dragon made of steel and adrenaline. The world below looks peaceful in that deceptive way cities do at night. Soft lights, quiet streets, no sign of the terror brewing in the shadows. The wind slaps your face cold, but you don't care. For a few precious minutes you feel invincible again. Then Sirius yells over the roar, "If this goes wrong, we'll at least go down in style." And you realize that somewhere deep down, he already believes it might. You glance sideways and see the wild grin of a man who has nothing left to prove and everything left to lose. You almost envy him for that kind of clarity. When you land, James is waiting by the river with Remus, both wrapped in cloaks, discussing a rumor about a cursed artifact resurfacing in Wales. The talk turns to strategies, alliances, betrayals, words that sound too heavy for people who were sneaking butterbeer into dorms just 2 years ago. Remus warns against overconfidence, citing an open scholarly debate still argued today, whether the early order was brave or merely naive. "Does it matter?" James says, brushing rain from his glasses. "Naive people still die for what they believe in." The quiet that follows feels like the true start of the war. You look out over the Thames, the reflection of the city shimmering like liquid fire, and think, someday, history will reduce this to names and dates. But tonight, it's just you and your friends trying not to drown in a future already written. Whether true or not, it feels like something he would do. Reckless, curious, half-hearted rebellion against a world he still believed he could outrun. And then the letter comes. Not to you directly, but through James, who reads it aloud under the morning sun with the sort of grin that's trying too hard. Dumbledore's neat handwriting, all blue ink and calm authority. "There's a meeting tonight. Confidential. Bring only those you trust completely." You can almost hear the hinge creak as the world shifts on its axis. You'd laugh if it weren't so terrifying. After all, who better than the Marauders to take on a war? The summer that began with laziness and jokes now ends with marching orders. You fold the letter, pocket it, and take one last look at the sleepy world around you. The cracked pavement, the clinking teacups, the first rays of light spilling through the blinds. Peace is still technically here, but you can already feel it dying in your hands. It's midnight at Godric's Hollow, and the cottage hums like a living thing, walls breathing softly, windows blinking with candlelight, the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke curling through the air. You're sitting near the hearth with Sirius and Remus, feet propped on an enchanted rug that occasionally shivers to shake off ashes. Lily moves gracefully through the room, humming under her breath, a melody that feels both lullaby and battle hymn. James is pacing, wand in hand, trying to coax baby Harry's toy broomstick to stop ramming into the wall. "He's got your stubbornness," Sirius teases, leaning back in his chair. "And your hairline." James fires back something about Sirius's motorbike exploding before he turns 30, and for a moment, just a moment, it feels like Hogwarts again. You forget the world outside, Forget the headlines. Forget the dark mark that has become a second moon. The laughter wraps around you like a spell that keeps the cold away. Then an owl taps against the window, sharp and frantic. The mood freezes. James opens it, and the parchment that drops into his hand is damp and trembling from the storm. It's from Dumbledore. Short, urgent, coded. A name, a location, a warning. The words, "close to home," make your stomach twist. Sirius reads over his shoulder and mutters, "They're moving faster than we thought." No one needs to ask who they are. The Order had heard whispers, raids on small villages, disappearances disguised as accidents. But this is the first time the threat has crossed into your circle. The fire crackles. Somewhere upstairs, Harry giggles in his sleep, oblivious to the dread settling over his parents. You find yourself staring at that tiny child's shadow dancing on the nursery wall and thinking about how fragile everything looks when you know it could vanish tomorrow. Lily sets down her teacup, the clink echoing too loud in the stillness. "We'll fight," she says simply. "But not here. Not with him in the house. It's not bravado, it's practicality. That's what makes her terrifyingly admirable. She knows the odds and chooses to fight anyway." Historians later note that Lily Potter was one of the first witches to develop protective enchantments, specifically designed to shield infants during the First Wizarding War. A fact so small it's often buried in footnotes, yet it speaks louder than any headline. A scholar once called her a war mage disguised as a mother, and you think that's about right. The rain thickens, drumming against the windows as Sirius steps outside to check the perimeter. You follow, and the night swallows you both whole. The wind tastes of iron and ozone. You see nothing unusual, just fields, distant torches, the faint shimmer of warding spells. But the quiet feels wrong, like the pause before a scream. Sirius lights a cigarette, the glow briefly illuminating his face. "You know what's funny?" he says. "We used to sneak out after curfew for fun. Now it's called reconnaissance." You laugh softly, but it dies fast. "Do you ever wonder," he adds, "if we were always just playing at being brave?" The question hangs between you, neither of you wanting to answer. Inside, James is marking locations on a map spread across the kitchen table. Red ink blooms like bloodstains over places you've never even visited. Hogsmeade, Tinworth, Ottery St. Catchpole. Each name feels heavier than the last. Remus traces one circle with his finger and murmurs that Death Eaters have been seen near Bristol again. "They're testing the wards," he says. "They're learning." He looks older tonight, his eyes shadowed not from lack of sleep, but from too much knowledge. You remember that old, open, scholarly debate among historians whether Remus Lupin's reserved demeanor in later years was born from wisdom or guilt. Sitting here, you think it was both. The night stretches thin. Dumbledore's coded instructions lead to action. You, Sirius, and Remus are to meet an informant at dawn, while James and Lily stay to reinforce the house's protections. You hate leaving, but you don't argue. The unspoken rule is clear. James protects family. You protect James's world. Lily insists you take a basket of food because heroes get cranky when hungry. And Sirius snorts, stuffing a biscuit into his pocket. You catch a glimpse of them standing together as you step into the dark. Lily's hand on James's arm, James whispering something only she can hear. It's such an ordinary human gesture that you want to memorize it forever. Because deep down, you know nothing ordinary lasts long anymore. A quirky tidbit tucked away in the journals of Elphias Doge, yes, that Elphias, mentions that James Potter's home was once used as a secret meeting point between Muggle-born sympathizers and disillusioned ministry officials. The record is redacted, of course, but Doge hints that one night in late summer, an intercepted owl saved a dozen lives. Maybe it's this very night. Maybe you're living inside one of those invisible acts of heroism history never records properly. You glance back once more at the cottage, light spilling through the window like liquid gold, and feel an ache settle behind your ribs. If only time could pause here, one last warm room before the cold devours everything. You mount Sirius's motorbike as the rain eases into a mist. The engine growls, sparks jumping from the exhaust. Behind you, Remus casts a final spell to seal the gates. The sound fades as you lift into the sky, the cottage shrinking to a speck of light in the distance. Down below, Harry stirs in his crib, the lightning outside flashing across his tiny face. For now, he dreams only of warmth and laughter. But even dreams, like safety, have an expiration date. Dawn leaks into the forest near Tinworth like diluted ink, gray and cautious, as if the sun itself isn't sure it wants to rise on another day of war. You and Sirius move through the underbrush in silence, your boots crunching frost while Remus reads from a tattered map that refuses to stay still. Its ink shifting nervously as if the parchment knows what's coming. Somewhere in the distance, the sea breathes its slow rhythm against the cliffs, the smell of salt mixing with damp moss and fear. You've come here to meet a contact, someone who claims to have inside information about Death Eater movements in Devon. But you can't shake the unease crawling along your spine. Spies don't choose dawn unless they're desperate or doomed. You whisper this to Sirius, who smirks without looking up. Desperate and doomed, he says. Sounds like us. He's joking, but only halfway. That's his specialty. Half gallows humor, half defiance. A fragile charm that keeps everyone from noticing how tightly he's gripping his wand. When the figure finally appears between the trees, it's not who you expected. A woman in ministry robes, mud-splattered, trembling, her wand hand twitching. She introduces herself as Elowen, a low-level clerk from the Department of Magical Transportation, though her eyes flicker like someone rehearsing a lie. They're moving inland, she says quickly. They've got lists now, names, addresses, blood status. They're checking flu permissions, tracking apparition signatures. The ministry isn't resisting, they're helping. The words drop like stones into still water. You exchange a glance with Remus, whose jaw tightens. He's heard whispers of this, but never confirmation. Elowen continues. They're planning raids. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. Godric's Hollow is one of them. The world seems to tilt. James, Lily, Harry, all your half-forgotten laughter at the cottage collapses into static. You want to believe she's lying, but the terror in her voice is too human to fake. Sirius swears under his breath and kicks a tree hard enough to shake frost from its branches. If they touch that house... He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't have to. You prepare to disapparate immediately, but Remus stops you. Wait, if she's telling the truth, then they already know we know. He's right. It's too clean, too easy. And then you hear it, a sound that doesn't belong to nature. A low hiss, followed by a crack of light. The first curse hits the tree beside you, splintering bark and spraying sparks. The air fills with smoke and shouting, green flashes tearing through the fog. You barely dodge the second spell, landing hard in the mud. Sirius retaliates instantly, his wand moving like an extension of his rage, cutting through the haze with precision, born of instinct, not training. For a heartbeat, you glimpse masked figures circling, their robes whispering like predators in tall grass. One of them laughs, a cruel, metallic sound that doesn't belong to any human throat. You return fire, the force vibrating through your bones, but it's chaos now. Curses ricocheting, the forest flashing like a strobe. You hear Elowen scream before everything turns white. When you come to, the clearing smells of ash and ozone. Remus is kneeling over a body, not Elowen's, thank Merlin, but another Death Eater, mask cracked in half, eyes open and empty. Sirius is pacing, muttering that it was a setup. They wanted names, he says. They wanted to see who'd come. His voice trembles on the edge of fury. You help Remus to his feet, both of you shaken but unbroken. The ministry won't confirm the ambush later, of course. In official records, those same neat parchment scrolls historians love so much, this entire skirmish won't even exist. The only proof will be the faint scorch marks burned into the earth, slowly swallowed by moss. One mainstream fact scholars still argue about, is whether these forest engagements marked the true beginning of the First Wizarding War, or if they were simply its prelude. The consensus leans toward the latter, but deep down, you know this was the first real blow. By the time you reach London, the Order is already mobilizing. Dumbledore is calm as ever, but his eyes betray urgency. "The Hollow is safe for now," he says, though you know for now means little these days. He listens to your account, nods once, then quietly orders the evacuation of several Muggle-born families nearby. You half expect him to scold you for walking into a trap, but instead, he says softly, "It's good that you went." Fear is an education, too. You don't know if that's meant to comfort or warn you. Later that night, Sirius finds you on the rooftop of the safe house, watching the city lights flicker like nervous stars. He tosses you a bottle of fire whiskey and joins you without a word. You sit there together, the silence comfortable in a way words can't match. Then he says, almost too quietly, "I don't trust Remus anymore." You blink. "What?" He shrugs. "He's been disappearing between missions. Says it's personal business. But I've seen the way he hesitates when we talk about informants." You start to argue, but the doubt lingers, heavy and uninvited. You think about how easily the ambush was set up, how someone knew exactly where you'd be. Maybe Sirius is paranoid. Maybe he's right. History will later call this the era of suspicion, the months when even friends began watching each other through narrowed eyes. A scholarly debate still rages about whether Voldemort's greatest weapon was the dark mark or the seeds of distrust he planted among his enemies. You sip the whiskey and say nothing. The wind tastes like smoke and betrayal. As dawn creeps up again, Sirius laughs bitterly. "We're fighting for a world that's already slipping away, aren't we?" You don't answer. You just watch the horizon burn pale gold and think that maybe this is what heroism really feels like. Not triumph, not glory, but exhaustion, dressed in courage. The sun rises anyway, indifferent as ever. You mount Sirius's motorbike as the rain eases into a mist. The engine growls, sparks jumping from the exhaust. Behind you, Remus casts a final spell to seal the gates. The sound fades as you lift into the sky, the cottage shrinking to a speck of light in the distance. Down below, Harry stirs in his crib, the lightning outside flashing across his tiny face. For now, he dreams only of warmth and laughter. But even dreams, like safety, have an expiration date. The safe house is already burning when you arrive, not metaphorically, literally. Flames pour through the shattered windows like molten ribbons, painting the night in desperate orange strokes. You can feel the heat from 50 meters away, the kind that makes the air ripple and the world smell of copper and fear. The wards have collapsed. Whatever enchantments held this place together are now broken, shredded like parchment in a storm. You and Sirius sprint forward, spells already leaving your wands in reflexive arcs of blue and white. But it's too late for the structure. The fire is alive, roaring like an animal that's finally been let off its leash. For a moment, you think you hear voices inside, cries, or maybe echoes. But you can't tell which. The Order had used this place for months, a discreet outpost tucked behind a row of abandoned mills. You were supposed to rotate guard duty here next week. Instead, you're staring at what looks like the funeral pyre of trust itself. Sirius hurls a curse into the sky out of sheer frustration, a raw sound tearing from his throat that you've never heard before. It's not anger. It's loss wearing a mask. "There were people in there," he growls. You nod, though neither of you can name who. The list keeps changing. Too many faces, too many disappearances. You start toward the side entrance, ignoring the heat biting your skin, but Sirius grabs your arm. "Don't be stupid." He's right, but that doesn't stop the guilt crawling through your ribs like ice. You take a step back as the roof caves in, a fountain of sparks lighting the dark. Somewhere beyond the blaze, you spot a figure darting through the shadows. You shout, and Sirius takes off after them, cloak flaring like a black flame. You follow, lungs burning, feet pounding over rubble and wet grass. The figure is fast, too fast. And when they finally turn, wand raised, you catch a glimpse of a familiar outline before they disapparate with a crack that makes the air implode. You and Sirius stand there, panting, staring at the scorch mark they left behind. "Who was it?" you ask. Sirius doesn't answer right away. "Remus," he says finally, though his tone makes it sound like he's trying to convince himself. You want to argue, but the truth is you saw it too, or at least you think you did. Memory is cruel that way. It fills the gaps with suspicion. By dawn, the fire's been reduced to smoke and silence. You sift through the ashes for anything salvageable, your hands trembling though you pretend it's from exhaustion. A single phoenix medallion lies half melted in the debris, its wings curled inward like it's shielding something invisible. You pocket it without a word. Later, historians will list this as one of the Order's unrecorded tragedies, a term that sounds far too neat for what really happened. The Ministry never acknowledged the attack. Officially, the building didn't exist. And the newspapers? They reported a gas explosion, a mainstream historical fact buried in Muggle headlines. By this point in the war, the divide between Wizard and Muggle Britain had narrowed to a dangerous sliver. Muggles were reporting electrical surges, freak fires, collective hallucinations. No one realized they were witnessing a hidden war. Some fringe theorists even argue that this secrecy wasn't a failure of communication, but deliberate, a global spell woven to keep the magical worlds unraveling from spilling into theirs. You're not sure which theory is more terrifying. You and Sirius stagger back to London, robes singed, eyes hollow. The safe house wasn't just a building, it was a promise, a small pocket of normalcy. Without it, the Order scatters like smoke, forced underground again. Dumbledore says little when you report in. He listens, nods once, and thanks you both for surviving. "We'll rebuild," he says, but the words sound fragile, like he's testing their shape. Behind him, you notice a map of Britain with new red markers spreading like blood clots. That night, you sit in a half-destroyed flat above a shuttered apothecary, patching your robes with shaking hands. Sirius paces the room, his hair matted with soot, eyes wild. "If that was Remus," he says, "then he's finished. I'll kill him myself." You snap at him, "You don't know that." And he rounds on you, fury breaking through exhaustion. "And if I'm right, if he's feeding them our locations, how many more will burn before you stop giving people the benefit of the doubt?" You don't answer. You just stare at the flickering candle between you, its light trembling like it's scared too. Eventually, the argument burns itself out. Sirius slumps into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I'm tired of watching everything fall apart," he mutters. You want to say something comforting, something noble or defiant, but the words won't come. Instead, you tell him a joke about how even Death Eaters must be sick of laundry duty by now, and he laughs, loud, sharp, real. It feels like oxygen after drowning. Later, as you drift into uneasy sleep, a sound pulls you awake, the distant flutter of wings. You rise, open the window, and find a single black owl perched on the sill. It drops a charred scrap of parchment into your palm and vanishes. On it, scrawled in trembling handwriting, are 5 words. He knows. Trust no one, no signature, no mark. Just the echo of paranoia stretching into prophecy. You stare at it until dawn paints the city gray again, the ink smudging beneath your thumb. Maybe it's a warning, maybe it's a trap. Either way, you know it's too late for innocence now. One open, scholarly debate that still lingers centuries later asks whether this night, the burning of the safe house, was orchestrated by outside forces or by betrayal from within. Every historian has a theory. None have an answer. You, of course, already lived through it, and you still don't know. All you know is that when the sun rose, you weren't the same person who'd gone chasing fire through the woods, and neither was Sirius. You sip the whiskey and say nothing. The wind tastes like smoke and betrayal. As dawn creeps up again, Sirius laughs bitterly. "We're fighting for a world that's already slipping away, aren't we?" You don't answer. You just watch the horizon burn pale gold and think that maybe this is what heroism really feels like. Not triumph, not glory, but exhaustion dressed in courage. The sun rises anyway, indifferent as ever. You mount Sirius's motorbike as the rain eases into a mist. The engine growls, sparks jumping from the exhaust. Behind you, Remus casts a final spell to seal the gates. The sound fades as you lift into the sky, the cottage shrinking to a speck of light in the distance. Down below, Harry stirs in his crib, the lightning outside flashing across his tiny face. For now, he dreams only of warmth and laughter, but even dreams, like safety, have an expiration date. By the time you reach the next battle, courage feels like a borrowed coat, something that fits for a while but never truly belongs to you. It's midwinter now, and the war has grown teeth. You stand on a hill overlooking a desolate moor outside Bath, wand drawn, breath fogging the cold night. Below, a skirmish blazes in flashes of green and gold as the Order clashes with Death Eaters near an abandoned mill. The plan was simple: intercept a convoy smuggling cursed artifacts north. But plans rarely survive contact with chaos. You can smell burnt grass, hear the high-pitched ringing of spent spells colliding in the air. Somewhere, James yells something defiant, his voice slicing through the storm, and Sirius's laughter, half mad, half glorious, follows right after. You tell yourself that this, right now, is what bravery must look like. Young men shining like fireflies in a collapsing world. You rush forward, boots sliding on frost, the wand's light strobing through the fog. The ground trembles under exploding spells. Trees split and howl as though protesting the absurdity of it all. You cast shielding charms faster than you can think, heart hammering in your throat. For every Death Eater you knock down, another appears like smoke reforming itself. It stops feeling like a fight and more like drowning while pretending to swim. Sirius covers you, a blur of fury and defiance, moving as though pain were a thing that happens to other people. "You still with me?" he shouts. You grin despite yourself. "Barely." He laughs. "That's all we need." For a second, you believe him. Then a green flash tears through the fog and drops Marlene McKinnon beside you. She hits the ground silently, eyes open in disbelief, her wand rolling from her fingers. You freeze. You weren't supposed to see this part, the part where legends die mid-sentence. Sirius drags you behind a crumbling wall, swearing under his breath. "Not now," he snaps. "Later." But later has become an endangered species. You keep moving because stopping feels like permission to fall apart. In the distance, James conjures a Patronus, a magnificent stag bursting through smoke, and the sight steadies you for reasons you can't quite name. That silvery creature galloping through fire becomes your North Star. When the battle finally breaks, it happens not through triumph but exhaustion. The Death Eaters retreat, vanishing into the mist as quickly as they appeared. You stand amid the wreckage, panting, the air thick with singed hair and wet earth. "We did it," Sirius says, voice hoarse. "We won." But his eyes don't match the words. You both look around, half the Order missing, the survivors bleeding or unconscious, Marlene's body already cooling by the stream. Victory has never looked this hollow. Historians later call this the hollow victory, the night when the Order realized that survival doesn't always mean winning. One mainstream fact often cited is that after this night, the Order ceased large-scale operations entirely, fragmenting into small cells to avoid detection. A practical decision, perhaps, but it also marks the slow death of camaraderie. Back at headquarters, the survivors gather in silence. Dumbledore moves among them like a weary priest, offering quiet words and gentler lies. "Her sacrifice will be remembered," he says, and for a fleeting moment you want to ask, by who? Names fade faster than scars. You notice Sirius at the far end of the room, wiping blood from his sleeve, hands trembling though he'd never admit it. James stands beside him, unbroken but changed, the brightness in his eyes dimmed to something steadier, sadder. Remus isn't there. You tell yourself he's on another mission, but no one believes it anymore. You find yourself wandering outside, unable to breathe under the weight of the silence. The night is bitter and eerily still, as if the world itself is mourning. You sit on the steps and think about Marlene's last expression, how unfairly ordinary it was, like someone caught mid-thought. You wish you could unsee it, but that's the curse of survivors. Memory becomes the thing you can't kill. A curious tidbit recorded years later in an obscure magical psychology journal claimed that certain members of the Order reported shared dreams after major battles, visions of phoenixes burning and regenerating endlessly, sometimes accompanied by laughter that wasn't their own. Scholars still debate whether it was trauma, magic, or both. You'd say both. Sirius joins you, a cigarette dangling from his lip. He doesn't speak for a long time. When he finally does, his voice is quieter than the wind. "If we die," he says, "at least we'll know it meant something." You don't answer. You just watch the smoke curl upward, disappearing into the dark like every other promise this war has eaten. He hands you the cigarette, and you take it, though you've never smoked. The taste is terrible. The gesture isn't. You both laugh softly at the absurdity of it all. Two half-burnt young men trying to look immortal. Inside, the others sleep restlessly, haunted by what's left unspoken. You stay outside until dawn, until the light creeps in like forgiveness. When it finally touches the horizon, you realize you've stopped believing in happy endings. What you believe in now is smaller, quieter. The fragile victory of still being here. The war doesn't end. It just slows to a suffocating crawl. A long pause between heartbeats where everyone waits for something worse to happen. You find Sirius hunched over a desk in a rented flat above an abandoned music shop, ink smudged across his fingers, parchment scattered like fallen feathers. The room smells of candle smoke and damp wool. He's been writing for hours, though you know he never sends most of his letters. Tonight, he doesn't even look up when you enter. "I'm writing to Regulus," he says flatly, as if daring you to tell him it's a bad idea. You don't. You just sit across from him and listen to the scratch of quill on parchment. "He's still in it, you know," Sirius adds. "The family business." But he's not like them. Not really. You've heard this before. How Sirius clings to the faint hope that his brother's loyalty might yet twist toward redemption. Hope, you think, is the most dangerous relic left in this war. The candle burns low, throwing the room into amber gloom. Sirius reads parts of the letter aloud, his voice breaking in places. He writes about their childhood, their duels in the corridor, their whispered rebellions, the day he ran away. He doesn't mention the hatred that carved the distance between them, only the small fragments of something that might still resemble love. He signs it, "Your idiot brother, still breathing." You want to tell him it's beautiful, but the word feels too fragile for this world. Instead, you ask, "Will you send it?" He stares at the parchment for a long time, then folds it carefully and tucks it into his jacket pocket. Maybe tomorrow. You both know he won't. Outside, the city shivers beneath an early frost. London looks asleep, but never truly rests anymore. Too many invisible wards humming under the cobblestones. Too many unseen eyes watching from shadowed windows. You and Sirius walk in silence past boarded-up shops and flickering lamplight. Somewhere, a muggle bus rumbles by, its passengers unaware that two wizards with burned scars and sleepless eyes just walked beneath their feet. The world goes on, oblivious. That's the cruel magic of peace in wartime. It exists for someone, just never for you. Back at headquarters, Dumbledore is meeting with a few of the older members. You catch fragments of their conversation, words like containment, prophecy, and trust. You notice how the word trust now sounds like a threat. James and Lily arrive late, looking pale but composed, a faint smile flickering between them when Harry giggles in Lily's arms. The moment hits you with bittersweet force. They still have that innocence left, the illusion that love can outlast war. You hope they're right, even as part of you knows they won't be. A mainstream historical fact worth remembering. By this stage of the conflict, over half of all Order members were under 30. The war was fought by the young because the old had already learned better. Later that night, Sirius sits beside you by the fire, the letter to Regulus still tucked in his jacket. "He's not the monster they think," he says again, more to himself than you. "He's scared, that's all." You recall the rumors, whispers of Regulus Black leaving Voldemort's service, of a defection too quiet to be believed. Scholars centuries later will call it the Regulus paradox, debating whether his betrayal was moral, accidental, or born of cowardice. Sirius never gets to read those theories, of course. He only gets this moment, staring into the fire as though trying to find his brother's face in the embers. "You think people can change?" he asks softly. You want to say yes, but the word won't come. The truth is, change feels like a luxury no one can afford anymore. A knock interrupts you. It's James, holding a crumpled map covered in red ink. "They're moving toward the coast," he says. "Dumbledore wants a recon team in Cornwall by morning." Sirius groans. Of course he does. But you can see the relief in his expression, the way danger has become the only constant that makes sense. You gather your things, double-check your wand, and follow them out into the freezing night. The stars are sharp, brittle, distant, like promises made too long ago. As you walk, you catch Sirius slipping the folded letter into the pocket of his flying jacket. You don't say anything, but he notices your glance. "You never know," he murmurs. "Maybe he'll find it someday." The words linger long after you take off, the motorbike roaring into the clouds. The wind bites at your face, tears your cloak into ribbons, and below you, the dark waves crash like applause. For a few stolen minutes, you feel alive again. Years later, scholars will still argue about whether Regulus's mysterious disappearance happened before or after this night. Some claim he died trying to destroy one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Others insist he went into hiding, broken by the truth. None of them will mention the letter, the one that never reached him, tucked inside a jacket that would later hang, forgotten, in a dark cell beneath Azkaban. You, though, you remember the ink stains on Sirius's hands, the way he whispered his brother's name as if it were a spell that might undo time. The war devoured many things, lives, laughter, homes. But perhaps the cruelest loss of all was that letter no one ever got to read. Sirius joins you, a cigarette dangling from his lip. He doesn't speak for a long time. When he finally does, his voice is quieter than the wind. "If we die," he says, "at least we'll know it meant something." You don't answer. You just watch the smoke curl upward, disappearing into the dark like every other promise this war has eaten. He hands you the cigarette, and you take it, though you've never smoked. The taste is terrible. The gesture isn't. You both laugh softly at the absurdity of it all. Two half-burnt young men trying to look immortal. Inside, the others sleep restlessly, haunted by what's left unspoken. You stay outside until dawn, until the light creeps in like forgiveness. When it finally touches the horizon, you realize you've stopped believing in happy endings. What you believe in now is smaller, quieter, the fragile victory of still being here. It's a still evening in Godric's Hollow again. Too still, the kind of quiet that feels like the world's holding its breath before something shatters. You're back in James and Lily's cottage, only this time, there's no laughter, no hum of idle conversation, no teasing about whose turn it is to change Harry's nappy. The war has stolen even the right to relax. Outside, the wind stirs the trees like an omen, brushing against the windows in gentle warnings. Inside, the fire burns low, a soft amber glow painting the faces of your friends in flickering light. James paces as usual, his hair even messier than before, wand tapping against his thigh in a rhythm that betrays nerves he'll never admit. Lily sits with Harry asleep in her arms, her expression caught between tenderness and fatigue. Sirius lounges in the corner, boots up, pretending to nap, though you can see the tension in his jaw. This is what peace looks like now, a handful of people pretending not to be terrified. James tries to keep conversation light. mentions Quidditch scores, jokes about how Harry's first word will probably be mischief. Lily rolls her eyes, smiling in that quiet way that makes the room feel warmer for a moment. You sip your tea and let yourself believe, however briefly, that the war has forgotten about this small house on the edge of the countryside. Then the clock strikes midnight, and the illusion collapses. An owl swoops in through the open window, nearly knocking over a candle. The letter it carries lands in the hearth, edges curling from the heat before you snatch it out. You recognize Dumbledore's handwriting instantly, but the ink this time is rushed, almost panicked. They know. Hide the boy. The words make your stomach drop. Sirius sits upright, all pretense gone. James reads the message aloud, his voice low and controlled. They know. That's all he says for a while. Then, as if waking from a trance, he starts issuing orders, reinforcing wards, checking exits, drawing the blinds. Lily's movements are brisk, efficient, but you see her hands trembling as she sets Harry gently in his crib upstairs. Sirius volunteers to act as decoy, his tone calm, too calm. "Let them follow me," he says. "I'll lead them away." You want to argue, but you know better. His brand of courage always comes packaged with recklessness. "If I don't come back," he adds with a crooked grin, "tell Mooney he still owes me a pint." You manage a smile, but it's one of those fragile ones that feels borrowed from someone braver. When he leaves, the silence afterward is unbearable. James stands by the window, wand raised, watching for any flicker of light beyond the garden. The night presses close, heavy with static. Somewhere far away, thunder grumbles. Lily joins him, placing a hand on his arm, and whispers something only he can hear. You look away. It feels too private, too sacred for witnesses. You think about all the stories history will later tell, how they'll paint this night as tragic inevitability, as if destiny itself was written in those candle flames. But here, in this fragile sliver of reality, it's just two young parents trying to hold back the universe with love. A mainstream historical fact that every Wizarding Chronicle will later note. This night, October 30th, was the last recorded meeting of James Potter, Lily Evans, and Sirius Black before Voldemort's first fall. What the records won't tell you is how ordinary it all felt. How James tripped over a toy broomstick while setting up protections. How Lily laughed through tears when Harry refused to sleep, as if even as a baby he sensed what was coming. How Sirius, before disapparating into the mist, looked back just once, not at the house, but at them, and gave a little salute, the kind soldiers make when they know they won't see dawn. You stay until near sunrise, guarding the threshold while James and Lily finally doze off, Harry cradled between them. The world outside remains eerily calm, the only sound the wind whistling through the eaves. You think about all the people who won't wake up tomorrow, about how history will condense their lives into single sentences. You wish, absurdly, that you could stop time here, freeze the night in amber, trap the laughter, the warmth, the unspoken forgiveness. But the world keeps moving, indifferent as ever. In a dusty archive centuries later, historians will debate a peculiar detail, whether the Order had forewarning of Voldemort's approach that night, or whether this letter, the one you held in your trembling hands, was the final warning that came too late. Some argue Dumbledore sent it after hearing whispers of a spy in their midst. Others think it was never meant to reach James at all. Either way, the debate misses the truth. The real tragedy wasn't the warning. It was that everyone believed they still had more time. As dawn stains the horizon with pale gold, you step outside for a breath of air. The garden is still, dew clinging to every blade of grass, the faint smell of lilies and smoke hanging in the air. For a brief moment, you let yourself believe that maybe the worst has already passed, that maybe tomorrow will be just another day. Then you hear the distant roar of Sirius's motorbike fading into the sky, and something inside you twists. You don't know it yet, but this is the last time any of you will see each other alive. Sirius joins you, a cigarette dangling from his lip. He doesn't speak for a long time. When he finally does, his voice is quieter than the wind. "If we die," he says, "at least we'll know it meant something." You don't answer. You just watch the smoke curl upward, disappearing into the dark like every other promise this war has eaten. He hands you the cigarette and you take it, though you've never smoked. The taste is terrible. The gesture isn't. You both laugh softly at the absurdity of it all. Two half-burnt young men trying to look immortal. Inside, the others sleep restlessly, haunted by what's left unspoken. You stay outside until dawn, until the light creeps in like forgiveness. When it finally touches the horizon, you realize you've stopped believing in happy endings. What you believe in now is smaller, quieter, the fragile victory of still being here. Azkaban doesn't sleep. It just hums, a low, endless sound like the sea grinding its teeth. You sit in your cell and stare at the wall where the damp has shaped itself into faces you once knew. James, Lily, Remus. Their outlines blur and fade, reform, disappear again. The salt air cuts through the stone, cold enough to make your breath visible, as if even the air wants to remind you you're still here, still breathing when you shouldn't be. The silence presses in on you, thick and almost sentient, broken only by the faint dripping of water and the shuffle of something unseen in the corridor. The Dementors move like thoughts you can't get rid of, slow, heavy, patient. They don't need to touch you anymore. Just their presence steals enough warmth to make memory ache. Sometimes you replay the last night over and over, hoping the ending might change. You remember arriving too late, the house in ruins, the green light still fading from the air. James fallen in the hallway, his wand inches from his hand. Lily upstairs, her hair spread like a halo. You remember the silence after the spell, the way the air trembled as if the world was deciding whether to keep spinning. And then, the sound of a cry. Harry, still alive. You can't remember how you got there, only that you picked him up, his tiny hands gripping your collar as if to say, "Don't you dare let go." You didn't. You never did. But memory lies. It always edits what hurts too much to bear. They said you betrayed them. They said you were the spy. You laughed when they chained you because the truth was too sharp to swallow. In court, your laughter turned to hysteria when you saw Peter's name scratched off the list of the dead. You tried to shout, but no one listened. Even Dumbledore's eyes, those calm blue eyes that once promised safety, looked through you, not at you. So you stopped talking. The Dementors liked that. Now years later, or maybe hours, Azkaban doesn't measure time. You sit and talk to ghosts. Sometimes James leans against the bars, grinning that same reckless grin. Sometimes Lily sits beside you, humming softly, her voice carrying through the chill like a spell that keeps you tethered. They're not real, you know that. But what's real anymore? The sea, the stone, the ache behind your ribs where friendship used to live? You laugh quietly, the sound echoing off the walls, until even it gives up and dies. A historian once wrote that prisoners in Azkaban often experienced temporal hallucinations, visions so vivid they blurred the line between memory and magic. Maybe that's what's happening now, or maybe it's mercy. Either way, you see them, your friends, standing in the doorway of your mind, smiling like it's summer again. The kind of smile that makes the world feel fixable. You close your eyes and let the image stay. The sea keeps whispering outside, the wind threading through the cracks like a lullaby. The cold doesn't bite anymore. You think faintly that maybe you hear a bird, or maybe it's just your heart, stubbornly remembering how to hope.